Hey guys, welcome back to Music 154 Form Analysis. This week we're going to cover binary form. Binary form is and of itself a history lesson because it leads directly to sonata form, which is found in symphonies and arias. This form, sonata form, is actually not a form, that's why I call it sonata form. It's a procedure for dramatizing the songs and the dances into larger, more complicated forms, and it's one of the greatest aesthetic accomplishments of the classical period. It is for this reason that the next bunch of lessons will focus primarily on Baroque and classical music. For this and every lesson moving forward, it is essential that you remember the building blocks of form as we discussed last week. That is, sections, phrases, ideas, motives. Also, please recall the sentence and the period forms. These formal units are used to build larger musical structures in Western music, the first of which is binary. By the end of the 18th century, it was well established that smaller forms led to larger, more complex forms. Heinrich Christoph Koch, a composer and theorist living in Germany, wrote the following in one of his treatises. The student avoids hindrances if they first learn to compose small pieces. If they are then given instruction in how such a small composition can be given a greater length through various means, it will not seem difficult to them to proceed by degrees to the largest and most complex kinds of compositions. The small forms that Koch lists are as follows. He talks about all of these dances, all of which have different characteristics. You can almost think of the dances as little cartoons, okay? And the little characters are dancing around according to whatever style the dance piece is. So there's the gavotte, which is supposed to be a pleasant dance, and it's characterized by a half-note pickup to the measure. The bourrée is basically the same thing as the gavotte, but it has a quarter-note pickup instead of a half-note. The polonaise is in 3/4, and it's a very grave, solemn composition. The contradance is actually quite popular in the United States nowadays. I don't know if any of you have contradanced before. It can be to any meter, but it has to be lively and comic, and is typically associated with peasants. Minuet is in 3/4 time, and is an aristocratic. And then the march is 2/4, and it's processional and militaristic. There's also songs, and then a theme for variations that Koch lists. The dance forms that Koch lists would have been performed in suites going from one to the other to the other. This is an example from 1685, so 100 years almost earlier than what Koch wrote about. And it's not actually listed in Koch's treatise, but this is a saraband. This is a Spanish origin dance. You can look it up on Wikipedia. It's in 3/4 time, and it's supposed to be slow and stately. I've got two sections here. The A section, which is repeated, and it has an IAC in the key of 5. And a B section, which is also repeated, and it has a PAC in the key of the tonic. As far as my phrases go, I've got my one IAC, so I'm marking off a phrase for the entire A section. And further analysis revealed to me that this is a sentence structure. So my first two-measure idea is measures 1 and 2, and then my next two-measure idea is right after it. The first two-measure idea has motive X, which is in the soprano line. It's got a dotted quarter followed by an eighth note and a quarter note, and then motive Y, which is 2 eighth notes and a half note. The second two-measure idea has motive X prime, which I've called X prime because it moves, the dotted quarter note moves over one beat into beat 2. And then Y, because we have 2 eighth notes followed by what is essentially, it's a dotted quarter note, but it's very close to a half note, so I call it motive Y. The continuation doesn't really exhibit any fragmentation or liquidation, but I've called it a sentence because look at the way the chords all of a sudden start to pick up speed towards the end. So I didn't really want to divide this into 2+2 measure ideas. I wanted to, I think when you listen to it, the music goes all the way to the end. And you'll notice that it starts off in B major. So this is a sentence that begins in E major, the basic idea, and then in the continuation concludes in B major, which is the key of 5. And there we have an IAC. The second part of the form, the B section, is also a sentence structure. I've got a whole phrase marked over the entire B section. I got my first 2-measure idea and my second 2-measure idea. In my first 2-measure idea, the first measure has x prime, again because the dotted quarter note is on beat 2 this time instead of on beat 1. Okay, so there's a variation there. And now I've got motive y, 2 eighth notes followed by a dotted quarter or a half note. And then in the next 2-measure idea, I've got motive z, which is now we have more faster notes. We have eighth notes, and then a dotted eighth and a 16th. And then it ends with motive y, which is 2 eighth notes and a half note. Same thing happens here. Now we've come back to E major for the second half of this sentence, and we're going to conclude. Look at how much faster the chords are moving. Okay, and we push to this cadence, and we've got now a PAC back in the tonic. So altogether we have an A section and a contrasting B section. The A section has by the end modulated to the key of 5, and the B section begins in the key of 5 and modulates back, returns to the tonic. Now notice when we return to the tonic, there's no return of any thematic material from the beginning. If anything, motive Z kind of takes over. Okay, so when you have this kind of continuous music, we call this simple binary form. You have 2 sections, an A and a B section, and they are distinct from one another. Let's give this a listen. The very next piece from the same suite from 1685 is a minuet. And you can see that I've got my sections labeled A and B. Looking at the A section, I've got 2 cadences now. So I mark a phrase at the end of measure 4, and I mark another phrase at the end of measure 8. Inside that, I've got 2-measure ideas. And notice here in measure 1, I've got motive X, and in measure 2, I've got motive Y. Motive X is 3 quarter notes, high note going to a low note and back up. And motive Y is a half note and a quarter note, going up a step. Notice that in the second phrase of my A section, I've got the same motive X and the same motive Y. And this time I've got a different cadence. So the first time I've got a PAC in 1, and the second time I've got a half cadence in 1. Okay, so this structure together is what we call a reverse period. Remember, a period has to have a stronger cadence at the end. Well, this one has the weaker cadence at the end, so it's kind of backwards. But it's still a period. Looking at my B section, I've got 2 cadences again. Here I marked a phrase from measure 9 until my half cadence. And then I marked another phrase from measure 13 until my PAC in 5 in measure 16. Inside of those phrases, I've got two measure ideas. From the beginning of the B section, I've got motive Y now in my upper voice. So there's a little bit of contrast from the A section. Now motive Y is beginning things. It happens again in the second measure of the B section. Then in the second phrase of the B section, notice that I begin to have a progression in B major. So I've modulated at this point away from E major into B major. I begin with motive X, and then I have motive Y prime, which is now, that half note has been changed to a dotted quarter note. And then I've got what I call motive Z in the two measure idea right here, okay, which is 2/8 notes going down to a dotted quarter and then 1/8 note to a dotted half. So we got a PAC now in the key of B, which is 5. Let's take a look at what happens now, because there's another section coming up. I've got half cadence in the tonic and a phrase, and a PAC in the tonic and another phrase. Inside of those phrases, I have two measure ideas each. And notice that here I'm back into my tonic and I'm using motive X just on different pitches. And now I got motive X down in the bass. In the second phrase of this, I've got here motive X again in my soprano. And I got motive Y prime. Motive Z, which is the same as before. And a PAC in the tonic. So what's going on here is we've got the same music now coming back with another period. So we call this an A prime section, because it's the same music as before in terms of motives, but this time the harmonic relationship is reversed. So now I've got a half cadence in the tonic to begin with, and then a PAC in the tonic to conclude it. So now this is a straightforward period. But more than that, the section has resolved the music. So we've had our contrasting B section, which ended in a different key, and now our A prime section brings us back to the original key, and then the second phrase of it concludes the piece with a PAC in that key. So you might be asking, wait a second, aren't there 3 sections here? Why is this called binary form? Well, because the B and the A prime sections repeat together. So what we essentially get is A, B, B, A. And this particular form is called rounded binary. So we still call it a binary form, but it's a rounded binary. Let's give this one a listen. Another type of small form that Koch mentions is the theme for a theme and variations. So here's an example by Mozart. The actual tune of this we know as Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, but the original tune is some French song which I don't know how to pronounce, so I'm not going to do that. And here you can see we've got a rounded binary form. The first A section goes from a tonic all the way to a tonic cadence, so it actually ends in the tonic. We call this the exposition section. The B section kind of has a pedal 5 the whole way through and ends on a half cadence. We call this the contrasting middle. And now the A section is returned as A prime. And we call this the recapitulation. Let's give this a listen. So since this is a theme and variations movement, I thought that I'd at least show you the first variation that Mozart composed, but it's the same exact structure. A, B, A prime is a rounded binary, and you've got your exposition, contrasting middle, and recapitulation. Okay, to sum up, we've got binary form has two kinds. There's simple binary, which has two contrasting sections. That's the saraband that we saw at the beginning. And then the rounded binary, where the opening theme returns at the end. We call that an A, B, A prime section. It has exposition, contrasting middle, and recapitulation. And those are the minuet that we just heard right after the saraband, and then the Mozart Twinkle Twinkle Little Star variations. But again, the name is actually French something, but I don't know what it is. All right, that's our intro to binary form. Again, the binary form is the simplest form that leads to then sonata form. And we'll see how that happens over the course of the next few classes.